Greetings and peace. I would like to start this with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be with you and yours. And Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. Today's presentation, I would like to talk about the racial segregation in schools and everyday life in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, USA. And I have the right to do this as a lifelong resident who's grown up here and have experienced day-to-day life here. So I hope you enjoy it and benefit from it. And again, this is for free speech purposes and entertainment and education purposes. Now, this talk basically dissects this issue from schools, neighborhoods, and power systems. The disclaimer and purpose: this presentation is created solely for research, education, and public awareness. It includes documented academic analysis, public data, and lived experience. No private individuals are named. Content is presented under fair use doctrine for nonprofit educational purposes and free speech. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is coincidental or based on verifiable public events. All right, let's start with the demographics. Upper Darby Township is 39.6% white, 35.3% black, 12.7% Asian, and 7.9% Hispanic. The public school district is over 70% non-white and serves around 12,000 students. The demographic divide is spatially aligned. Drexel Hill, that area, which has its own separate zip code, but yet it's part of Upper Darby, remains majority white and affluent, while Beverly Hills includes more immigrants and black residents. These patterns define attendance zones, school funding disparities, and social experience. Now, the historical segregation is nothing new, where in the mid-20th century, Delaware County resisted school integration. Minorities were bused past nearby white schools, and resistance to mergers and demographic shifts persisted well after Brown versus Board of Education. Integration never happened equitably, and lines were redrawn to favor white zones. Separate but unequal continues under the guise of policy and zoning choices, till this day in 2025. Now, there is a intra-district segregation, where despite being part of the same school district, students are divided along race and income lines. 5 elementary schools in Beverly Hills are 85 to 96% non-white and receive Title I funding. Meanwhile, Drexel Hill schools remain majority white and are not Title I. These boundaries were not accidental. They reflect decades of housing, zoning, and school board decisions that reproduced inequality. The Misrepresentation Index, where scholarly studies show individual schools stray by 25 to 37% from district-wide racial averages. This results in clustered segregation, and students in Beverly Hills experience under-resourced schools and higher student-teacher ratios. And if you look at it in contrast, Drexel Hill schools see greater funding and academic outcomes, and de facto segregation thrives through boundaries and misrepresentation. Let's look at good old UDHS. Officially, the high school is racially mixed. However, course tracking, AP access, discipline policies, and social groups remain racially stratified. Black and brown students report being disproportionately disciplined and excluded from gifted tracks. These disparities mirror national trends and reflect persistent institutional bias. Now, even when I went to high school, right, like they would keep the Drexel Hill students separate in their own separate classes with their own teachers. They were preparing them for a better future in terms of higher education, jobs, and all of that in between. While those of us that were non-white, and including the Clifton Heights students who were, I guess, classified as low-level white people to the system, right? We were just being prepared for either work or community college or military or whatever have you after the high school life. So we weren't being prepared for success compared to the Drexel Hill crowd. And yep, that's how it is sometimes. Now, this is a public event that I'm showing here as I've showed in my disclaimer in the beginning. So, Superintendent Dunlap's reforms were blocked. In 2016, Superintendent Dunlap proposed flexible attendance boundaries and a new school in Bywood. He faced massive resistance from political insiders, some of whom had family in Drexel Hill schools. Though equity-based, his plan was shut down and he was pressured to resign. Race was never openly named, but it was clearly the force behind the resistance. Academic and truancy disparities, where we see that black student math proficiency at Upper Darby high in 2023, right, is at like 4% or negative 4% in some cases. Truancy soared from 16% 2018 to 46% in 2023, and the dropout risks are highest in schools serving majority minority populations. Funding is 22% below adequate levels, further worsening outcomes, and academic performance cannot be separated from structural racism. And myself in the high school, I've had good teachers that were white, whether they were men or women. Then I also had those that were scumbags that were trying to fail us or make us rage quit or drop out or not show up to school anymore. Even the 6-7 months in fall of 2017, the 6-7 months I worked at the front office, right? It was just a circus where they were trying to run me out. There was this one guy who was trying to bully me. Others were trying to run me out. And then this one woman who was always freaking out, like in the secretary's office, who tried to get me in trouble one time. And it just goes to show you that for myself as a Pakistani American or any non-white individual working in a white space, we always have to deal with this hostility. So, I was able to resign peacefully and get out of there before they could set me up in any kind of trouble, which is quite unfortunate as someone who was raised here, worked here, went to school here. But at the end, some people will never like you and accept you, no matter how good you are. There is also a biased residency enforcement, where districts scrutinize minority families' address disproportionately. Residency enforcement relies on anonymous tips, often racially motivated. Many non-white students are forced out, while white students with technical violations are overlooked. This process helps maintain white majority zones and denies equal access to public education. Of course, the nepotism and insider networks. In Upper Darby, many administrators and decision makers have long-standing ties to political and law enforcement circles. These networks are predominantly white and connected via fraternal lodges, whether it's Freemasonry or the FOP police lodges, alumni associations, and family appointments. This unspoken network protects itself and filters who succeeds or who is hired into power. And I'm myself, who comes from a Freemasonic background, right, from England, from America, from Pakistan. I come from different initiatic paths and circles and Sufism and other paths. So, the guys here in Upper Darby are like infants compared to those that I have dealt with. But yeah, that's how it is with the people here. Like, they'll help each other get into the township jobs, into the union jobs. They tend to deal with their own and stick with their own, right? If, let's say, you have a woman whose daddy was a cop, right, in a FOP lodge, chances are that he's going to end up hooking her up with another, let's say, son of a fellow FOP lodge officer, and they just kind of tend to keep things in their own circle. But yeah, that's how it is, right? The union jobs, they become cops and things like that. And yeah, that's how it is. But again, from where I come from, these people are infants. I've dealt with this on a much bigger scale. Here, this is a good one too. So in gender, race, and social control, right? In multiple instances, we see that white female students tied to insider networks were used to entrap or falsely accuse minority male peers. These tactics create fear and reinforce white dominance without legal recourse. It is a gendered and racialized weaponization of the school's social culture. And of course, this was tried against me as well when I was in high school, but I never paid attention to it. I never fell into the trap because in America, whether it's psychological warfare, gang stalking, or let's say you're being set up for something, it all depends on you. If you react to it, then you fall for it. But if you keep your cool, then you avoid 99% of the issues in this country. So yeah, I've seen it, in the high schools those that were tied to the snobby networks, the inside nepotism networks. They had a different level of privilege, and sometimes they were used against other, let's say, minority students who would have had an attraction towards white women. But yeah, this is something that needs to be addressed as well. And there were some instances, I talked to a buddy of mine who went to high school in the 90s, right? And he said that there was this one black student who was like getting a scholarship for college or something through football or whatever. And then there was like a white girlfriend that was used against him to take that privilege away from him. So, yep, some things never change. Now, if we look at the residential life aspect, we see the surveillance of Muslim communities as well. So during the 2010s, Muslim-owned businesses and youth, including myself, yours truly, were monitored using black drug dealers turned confidential informants in the gang stalking surveillance program because the police chief at that time had a hard-on against Muslims, and it's quite unfortunate. But these informants were granted immunity for harassment and just surveilling the communities. One setup involved a man spitting on my shoes while officers were waiting on the other end of the block. Had I reacted, I would have been arrested. This was systematic, not random. So again, like in my previous slide, that if you're a law-abiding American citizen, you're going to work, you're not bothering anyone, you're paying your taxes, you're keeping your cool, then no one in this country can touch you. That's one lesson that I can give you in this presentation. If you mind your business, if you keep your cool, even if you know there are certain setup scenarios against you and you're not falling for it, then yeah, no one in this country can touch you. That's how it is, whether it's informants, gang stalkers, or whatever. And the Islamic law tells you to be a good lawful citizen of the country that you live in. So just that alone prevents you from getting into any kind of situation. And look at Upper Darby today. So many Muslim Americans live here peacefully, work here, enjoy life with their families, work, school, they're paying their bills, taxes on time, and are contributing members of this community through their activism and businesses. So as much as people tried to scrutinize the Muslim American community in Upper Darby, I mean, it's a night and day difference from the 2010s, and if you look at it now in the 2020s. So something did change for the better. Transportation was also used as a tool of segregation, where black and brown students were bussed out of Drexel Hill neighborhoods to under-resourced schools far away. Walter M. Senko Elementary, which is now closed, located outside the district, is 96% non-white. And I believe they've distributed those students after the closure of the school to the different schools in Upper Darby. So despite being closer to white schools, students are routed to failing ones. It's gerrymandering by school bus at that time. And it's still happening now to certain extents, depending on the neighborhood where the student lives. So it all depends on which neighborhood of Upper Darby you're living in. You're still getting the same treatment. Of course, there's a mental health aspect as well, where these structural inequities create a climate of anxiety, depression, and hostility. Surveillance, coded racism, academic failure, and social alienation wear students down. Education becomes a battlefield, not a sanctuary. Minority students in Upper Darby are forced to fight for dignity daily. And I'm not saying all of the white teachers or administrators are bad. There are a few of them that have become lifelong friends with me. I love them. But there are many of them also who are basically doing what they're doing as is being described in this presentation. But yeah, most of these people, they don't even live in Upper Darby, or they don't even send their kids to school here. For them, it's just a job. There is a structural barrier to equity. So school funding is tied to property taxes. This ensures poor non-white neighborhoods remain underfunded. Zoning policies maintain racial divides. Despite diversity in population, systems were built to preserve advantages for white families. Change requires more than diversity statements. It needs the total upheaval of the structure. You know what I'm saying? All right, so we need the reform and resistance. What must change? 1. Redraw school boundaries with equity in mind. 2. Make leadership accountable to diverse communities. 3. End tracking and biased discipline. 4. Implement third-party audits of policy enforcement. And 5. Hire more teachers of color and empower minority parent voices. So my final thoughts is, what is happening in Upper Darby for many, many, many years is not a glitch. It's the system working as designed. Fairness is framed as disruption, equity is treated as threat, but naming injustice is the beginning of reform, and we can no longer be silent. Here are some sources and references that have aided me in this study, and I recommend you check these out at your own leisure and pleasure. Thank you for watching. If any questions or comments, please email me at salmansheikh911@gmail.com. And all the images and information and thoughts in this video presentation used were retrieved from public domain searches and my own experiences, and are the rightful property of their respective owners. The images and info and experiences described in the video are for the purpose of nonprofit awareness and education, which is protected by the copyright laws of fair use education purpose. All my videos are for nonprofit and education purposes. Thank you. All rights reserved.